All right, everyone. So what we're doing today is a workshop on stress management. My name is Kim Lombard, and I am the occupational therapist who works in Access and Lifelong Learning. So as our lovely little, what's it called, little meme over here, if that's what you call them, is good morning, let stress begin. I know we can all feel that way sometimes, particularly as we get closer to the end of the semester. So hopefully this workshop will give you a few strategies you can take away and implement to make the next few weeks a little bit less stressful for you. So just to give an outline, what we're going to be doing is looking at what is stress and looking at the fight or flight response. You may have heard about that before. We'll be looking at what factors contribute to stressful situations, the difference between eustress and distress, and then looking at some strategies for managing the stress. So firstly is to think about what stresses you out. You know, obviously with college, this may include things such as deadlines or, you know, a lot of lectures in one go, exams, different things like that, or even maybe things such as having to contact module coordinators or learning how to use new systems. All of these things are stressful aspects of becoming a student, and you know, I appreciate at certain times during the semester it can get a little bit more difficult, particularly when we may have, you know, a lot of assignments due at the same week. It sometimes can feel like there's a few pinch points here and there. Obviously, there's things outside of UCD life that can be stressful for us as well. Obviously, currently, obviously the whole country is in a lockdown, so that in and of itself is quite stressful. It might be things such as commuting whenever we are back to doing that in the future. That's a stressful thing for people too. So it's to think about, what sort of things in my day-to-day life can actually cause me a good bit of stress, because identifying those things means that we can kind of plan for them in advance to try at least reduce the stress as much as possible. So what is stress? Essentially, stress is a perceived threat or demand that causes us to have a stress response, and that creates 4 different reactions within ourselves. So the first one there is the emotional reaction. So the emotional reaction is the feelings that we get when we feel stressed. So one of them is feeling stressed. So that's quite a common one, I suppose. But other things, for example, could be feelings of irritability, sadness, worry, panic, shame, different things like this. And generally speaking, most of those feelings are quite negative. You know, they're not an enjoyable emotion to have. So that is kind of one of the aspects of stress that we experience ourselves. The next thing then is the physical reaction. So the physical reaction is the physical response that we have in our bodies to stress, which is probably the one thing that people will relate to the most. So that would include things such as a rapid heart rate, you know, increased breathing, shaking, sweating, different things like that. And in a minute, I'm going to explain to you why that happens, if you don't know already, because it can be useful to understand why. The next thing then is the behavioral reaction. So essentially, this is anything that we do or don't do in response to managing stress. So for example, that can include things such as avoiding a stressful situation, or reducing our activity levels. So for example, if a particular lecture stresses you out, so then you stop doing the lecture, that's us trying to manage the stress by avoiding it altogether. Obviously, it helps manage the stress in the moment, but it's not a productive coping strategy for down the line. So the next thing then is our mental reaction or our cognitive reaction to stress. And that is the thinking patterns that we may have when we do get very stressed. So just like the emotional reaction, this tends to be quite negative. I've never met somebody who's been very stressed and has said, I feel amazing and I'm thinking I'm doing great. Unfortunately, the thinking pattern that we have when we do get quite stressed is quite negative. So it's maybe fear of losing control, a fear of a negative evaluation by other people, a fear of failure, all that sort of stuff. So the thing to remember here, though, is that It is a perceived threat or demand. And the thing to remember there is the thing that connects us to our external world, our external, things that we perceive to be threatening, is our thinking patterns. And I'll explain that a little bit further as we go. Just moving on to it here. So the fight or flight response, and this is how I'll explain the kind of physical reactions. So essentially, from a physiological perspective, what actually happens is our brains are wired in order to keep us alive, essentially, and go into survival when we need to keep ourselves alive. And this is called the fight or flight response. So, for example, let's say if, maybe not in Ireland, because I don't think we have any bears in Ireland, but if we were in, let's say, North America, right, and we're walking through the woods in North America, having a great time, and then all of a sudden, this big bear comes out of nowhere and hungry, hasn't eaten for days, and he sees a nice meal in front of him, which is yourself. And the issue there is that our brains perceive a threat, that we're going to get eaten by a bear. So what gets released, as you can see here, is the brain releases a threat kind of signal down to our adrenal glands, which are on top of our kidneys. And what this then releases, come on to the next slide, is a thing called adrenaline, and then also cortisol. Cortisol you may have heard of as the stress hormone. But adrenaline is also released in our bodies. And what usually happens is the adrenaline turns on and turns off certain kind of systems within our bodies. And I'll explain this on this next slide here. So that leads, this adrenaline rush leads to the physical symptoms of stress. So for example, the increased heart rate. The reason why that is because our adrenaline turns on our heart, essentially turns it on in a more rapid pace in order to increase the blood flow to our muscles and our cells around the body. At the same time then, you might find that your breathing is very, very heavy, or you can't actually catch your breath in a sense, because it's trying to get oxygen into our body as much as possible. The other thing then is you might experience shaking, and this is because a lot of energy is going to our muscles. And the reason why it is because our brain thinks that we're going to fight or flight from the situation, so that we're either going to fight the bear or we're going to get the hell out of there. Obviously, I think you're supposed to freeze when there's a bear there, but we won't get into the logistics of actually coming across a bear in real life. But the point of it is that, as you can see here, different things happen. So you have a dry mouth, you might get dilated pupils, and the reason for that is to make sure that it's easier for you to identify threats within your environment. And it turns off our digestive system because that's not necessary right now. What's necessary is to get you out of that situation so that you can survive. Obviously, this response is really, really useful for keeping you alive in the instance of coming across a threat such as a hungry bear. The issue is when this reaction, fight or flight response, gets fired essentially at situations that aren't actually inherently threatening to our survival. So for example, sitting an exam can be very stressful, and if we get that fight or flight response, but the exam itself is not actually going to kill us, if that makes sense, actually going to impact our survival. So it's important to understand the physiological reaction of stress or why it happens, and to know that actually is a fundamental, I suppose, coping mechanism within our bodies. But it's to appreciate or to identify the situations where you may find that actually I find that these happen before I'm going to do a presentation or before I'm going to go into a lecture or participate in discussion or something. Because those things, although extremely stressful, they're not inherently risk averse to our survival. And this is where we need to learn how to manage those experiences so that we can engage in them properly without getting completely overwhelmed. So, come on here. What factors contribute to stressful situations? So the thing is that there's many reasons why certain situations are stressful. One of them, for example, is strong demands. So that means that the actual thing that you have to do is quite large. You know, it might be that the exam is worth 80% of your mark, or it's an interview that for a job that you want or something like that. The next thing is the timing or an imminent task. So we all know what it's like to be in a situation where maybe something is due in very not too long from now. It's a very urgent task to do. And the timing as well is that if you have many things that are due at the same time, that also leads to a more stressful kind of situation. Desirability as well. You know, our want to succeed, or our want to, let's say, get that job that we're at an interview for, or pass the exam, things like that, just our wanting to do it actually leads to the situation being more stressful. Controllability is another one, and actually this is an important one to bear in mind, because controllability is about how much control we have over a certain situation. And unfortunately, we think that we actually have a lot more control over external situations than we actually do. So, for example, you can do the things you have control over for, let's say, an exam, is doing the study that you possibly can, you know, doing your readings, all that sort of stuff, but you don't decide on what questions come on paper. Your lecturer has decided that. That's completely outside of your control. Another one, for example, that I give is, let's say if you're trying to commute to UCD, right, in the future, when we're back to doing that properly. You can do everything in your power to get to the bus stop, to make sure that if you're on the bus by this time, you get to UCD on time. And you can do everything in your power to do that, and then all of a sudden, the bus doesn't show up, because as a dub, it's not the most reliable service at times. And that means that you're late for college, and hence you're stressed out because you're late for college. But do you see how things outside of your control actually led to that situation? So what's important is, when we are stressed about certain things, is to look at the things that we do have control over and focus on them, rather than the things don't have control over, because we can't do anything about them. They're going to happen the way they're going to happen, but if we focus on the things that we can control, it does help manage the stress. The ambiguity as well. So ambiguity means, you know, something not being very clear, not knowing exactly what you're supposed to do. So let's say if you get an assignment brief which is quite ambiguous or vague in what you're supposed to do, that can be stressful, because you say, where do I even start with this? So asking, let's say, coordinators or clarifying it with, let's say, a classmate or something, can be really useful to do. And then life transitions. Life transitions such as going from school to college, or let's say if you're a mature student and returning to college, returning to education, or even just graduating, different things like that. A big life transition is inherently stressful. And the thing is that I'm not saying that these things aren't stressful. I'm saying that they are inherently stressful, but it's to recognize that and acknowledge that. You know, starting into UCD, particularly this year, has required students to get used to a lot of different systems and things like the library and Brightspace and all that sort of stuff from a virtual or a distance learning perspective. And that is very stressful. So it's to acknowledge that and say you're doing the best you can right now. And that's really, really important to recognize. The next thing here then is looking at good versus bad stress, or eustress versus distress. So the thing is that you may not realize this, but actually a certain level of stress in our lives is important. We do need to have a certain level of stress in our lives to propel us on and motivate us to do the things that we need to do. So for example, eustress or good stress is positive and beneficial. It means that you're challenged by meaningful opportunities. So it's challenging, but it's rewarding at the same time. And it's not too far out of your reach. So it's just challenging enough to make you grow, but it's not so challenging that it's overwhelming either. Obviously, we need the energy and motivation to meet the responsibilities and achieve our goals. So this, for example, is the things that lead to us to graduating college or receiving a promotion. Distress, on the other hand, is things where it's continuous overwhelmed experience of stress, where we kind of feel that we're consistently overwhelmed. And this is when that level of stress becomes eustress into distress. This is this kind of sense of being imposed upon difficulties with no light at the end of the tunnel. So, you know, that we can't see through all the assignments we have to do, or what the bigger picture is of doing this. So this may include things like financial difficulties, conflict, excessive obligations, even, for example, if you're having a lot of assignments due at the same time, so it might be that it's just a stressful situation and you can't actually see the light at the end of the tunnel with it. So it is important to realize that a certain level of stress is important for us to do, because if we didn't have any level of stress, none of us would do anything pretty much. But it's when that threshold becomes distressful, then that's when it becomes a concern. So looking at some stress management strategies, and we're going to jump into them here. So the first thing, first and foremost, is to make sure that you're doing the things that you love. And this can be anything. I obviously know right now is a little bit more of a challenge in relation to certain things like sports and concerts and different things like that we're unfortunately not able to engage with right now. But that doesn't mean that because we can't engage in those things that we're not allowed to engage in things that we do love. So it's trying to be creative a little bit right now and allowing ourselves the time to engage with things that are fun. So my particular favorite one is the top left here that says stressed is dessert spelled backwards, because I love to bake. So I think that's a very important point to make here. But it's thinking about things such as even reading. If you used to love reading before and then you started college and you find you don't really do that as much anymore, trying to incorporate that back into your routine. Just taking time out to, go for a walk or listen to your favorite podcast or your favorite music or something, but actually allowing yourself the time to do that is super, super important. Even calling a friend or, coloring or drawing or whatever it is, it's really, really important that you are doing the things that you do love in your day. The next thing is to try to find a support network. So obviously at the moment, I appreciate that most of us have to be, well, all of us need to be engaging in a virtual sphere for that. So it's looking at maybe trying to find a friend or a classmate or even a family member or somebody close to you who you can get things off your chest. So what I'm going to do is myself and Fiona will put up the notes for it afterwards. But there is a document that we have that lists all of the kind of activities and supports that are available within UCD at the moment in the one place. And absolutely do take a look at them, the different society events, or let's say, chaplains, coffee morning, different things like that, because it is important to get connected at the moment. And I do appreciate that it's particularly challenging for newer students who have started this year to start into a university at distance. Do take a look at it, and even if there's, let's say, friends from home or who are within your 5K or even your family who you can kind of just lean on and different things like that. The next thing then is to challenge your thinking. So what we mean by that is a thing called the stop technique. As I said before, one of the reactions of stress or of being stressed is the cognitions or the negative mental kind of thinking patterns that we have. And what the issue with that is that most of the time those things will spiral, and actually we end up starting to believe a lot of the things that we are saying to ourselves that can be quite negative. So the stop technique is a technique where we identify negative thought and we say stop. And then what we do is that we challenge it. So we say, what is the evidence that it's true and what is the evidence that it's false? So kind of saying to actually get the true evidence for something that to kind of challenge it to see, is it a true thing or is it not? So for example, if you're saying I'm going to fail the exam for this particular module, and then let's say the evidence is that you've cleared all, or you've done all the lectures for them so far, and let's say you've done 2 MCQs and you did pretty well, you did all right in them and everything. That's evidence there to demonstrate that you are on the right track. So it is important to identify that evidence for yourself. The next thing then is to try to replace with a positive and realistic thought. So what I mean by this is actually think, if a friend came to you and explained or said they were thinking the same things as you were. So I'm going to fail this exam. I'm really stupid. I'm going to fail this exam. Would you say to them, yeah, you are? You probably wouldn't. What you'd probably say to them is, you know, all you can do is try your best. You know, you've done all the work you possibly can for it. All you can do is try your best, and then we leave it in the past or whatever. The reason here is because we tend to be nicer to other people than we do to ourselves. And it's really important that we do think and challenge those negative thinking patterns that we have, and actually say to ourselves, I'm actually doing the best I can considering everything that's going on at the moment, and reminding ourselves about that. The last thing is reinforcement. So that's rewarding yourself, and that's rewarding yourself for challenging your thoughts. That's what I mean by that is. So, you know, giving yourself a pat on the back, you know, giving yourself a break during your day, or literally just anything that will reinforce that behavior of challenging your negative thoughts can be really useful. The next thing then is obviously trying to manage our time and set goals. So earlier in this semester, I did do a time management workshop, and there is the interactive workshop on our Brightspace module. And I would really encourage students to go and take a look at that, because it has much more in-depth information and strategies for managing our time and goals. But particularly when we have a lot of work to do and we kind of can feel like we don't have a lot of time to do it, or we don't really know even where to start, it is important to get a bit more of a hold on our time and different things like that. So using longer term planners, weekly planners, even using your Google Calendar to kind of plan out your day is really important. Even setting SMART goals. So what SMART means is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed goals. So what we mean by that is if we set a goal to say, I'm going to do well in chemistry, that's way too vague for us to know, you know, what does do well mean? How can we measure it? Does do well mean passing it? Do well mean getting an A grade? Does do well mean, you know, it's not very clear. And then is it achievable and realistic? And then time bound as well. So let's say a more SMART goal set would be, I'm going to study 2 sets of chemistry lecture notes each week for the next 4 weeks, and that's your goal. So as you can see, it's very specific. You know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. The measurement is, did you actually do the 2 sets of lecture notes each week or not? And maybe if not, it might be because you have other work you have to do that. And it's realistic and time bound. That means we can actually then achieve those goals a lot better than setting a very vague goal, such as I'm going to do well in this module. The next thing then is to make a to-do and a next action list. And this can be really useful for if we have a lot going on at the moment, and you know, we have a lot on our to-do list, but we don't know what the first step is for each thing. Even if it is, let's say, for example, it's prepping for tomorrow's tutorial, downloading the reading from Brightspace, that's the very, very first step. Then what's the next step? And then the next step after that. You know, looking at mum's birthday present, you need to discuss the present with your brother John or something. Or you have to do your washing. Okay, separate your whites and your darks. So it's the first step. The point of this is to get the ball rolling. And because the longer we leave it and the ball isn't rolling, the more stressed we get. And so that's where it's important. If you, let's say, for example, you have your history essay coming up, say, okay, what's my first step? Log on to Brightspace, download the brief and read it. That's your very, very first step. The next step may be, okay, brainstorm a few ideas, read over the lecture notes for that particular topic, and so on and so forth. It's to get the ball rolling with it. This one here then is prioritizing our tasks. This is the urgency, Eisenhower urgency matrix. You may have seen it before and you maybe haven't. Essentially, this is particularly useful for when you have a lot of things due or a lot of things going on, but you don't know where to start. You don't know which one is the most important thing to do. So essentially you take a piece of paper and you split it into 4 quadrants. And as you can see here, the first quadrant says urgent and important. The second quadrant says not urgent but important. The third says urgent and not important. And then the last one is not urgent and not important. And as you can see, you know, what you do is you write down all of the things you have to do, both academic and non-academic. and then start to put them into those quadrants and see where they kind of fall. So for example, you might have a history essay that's due in 2 days, and then you also have a politics essay that's due in a week and a half. So the politics essay that's due in a week and a half, it's really important, but it's not urgent right now. So put that in the second quadrant, which is number 2, which is to plan. Whereas the history essay that's due in 2 days' time or whatever, that is the most urgent thing. So put that in the do column. And that allows you to identify, once you go through all of your things, is the things that you need to start with, and then the things that you need to plan out to do. So that's where you go to your Google Calendar or your long-term planner and make a plan for the next few days about when you're going to do them. Leave that aside and then focus on the stuff that you need to do now. You may even need to do another one of these for the stuff that sits in that kind of first quadrant of urgent and important, just to make sure that you're absolutely sure where you should be starting. But this can be particularly important because sometimes when all of the stuff is in our head, we think everything's important and urgent. But actually, when we actually think about it and separate them out, they may not be. Obviously, we're not able to delegate our assignments to anybody else or eliminate them either, really. But there may be other things that may fall into these categories. So let's say, for example, you need your prescription or something like that. Is there somebody at home maybe that you could ask and pick that up when they're out at the shops or something like that? Or for eliminate, is there things where maybe projects that are not really that necessary right now, but maybe could be done over the Christmas break or something? Is that could be done instead? So just moving on here is incorporating breaks, and this is extremely important right now, particularly when we are at home. The issue is that we are all at home studying, sleeping, living, eating, showering, doing everything in our day in one environment. And that's not normal for us as human beings. We normally associate a particular environment with a particular activity. So for example, we would normally associate the likes of school or college with more academic, productive tasks, maybe a little bit of kind of social stuff there, like society events and stuff. And then home would be a lot more, you might do a little bit of work, but generally speaking, it's a space where we can come and take a break and, relax, different things like that. And those two things have been completely blurred now because we're all in the same environment all day. So incorporating breaks during our day is extremely important, just as important as all of the other activities you do, such as your lectures and your tutorials. And having short breaks throughout the day is also important. It's not to forget that if we were on campus, or even just anybody's regular day, we would normally have kind of these natural breaks that are built into our day. So moving from one building to a next, or commuting from your home to college or something like that. Unfortunately, right now we've lost those natural breaks in our day, and it means then we're just jumping from Zoom call to lecture, all that sort of stuff, all at the same place. So what's important is to really make an effort to incorporate some short breaks throughout the day and to change your environment. So what I mean by that is going outside as much as you can, leaving your desk. If you're going to take a break, leave your desk and go to another place in your house to take that break, because then you'll start to associate a particular place with productive tasks and then another place with things that are such as relaxation and the likes. So it is important to bear that in mind. The next thing then is taking good care of ourselves, and we know, obviously, I know all of us do know this. It is important, to try eat well as much as possible, limiting our sugar and our caffeine and processed food, trying to get a good enough amount of sleep, 7 to 9 hours, depending on what you feel you need yourself. And good sleep hygiene is an important aspect of that. So what sleep hygiene is essentially how we set up our sleep routine and our sleep environment. So is, for example, your bedroom, dark, a little bit colder at night, so that your body temperature can drop to allow you to fall asleep. Do you have your phone in bed? Would it be better to maybe leave your phone somewhere else when you're getting into bed? What is your routine as you are unwinding to get into bed in the evening? So it's to think about these things and to maybe look at smaller strategies that can help to make sleep a little bit better. The next thing then is exercise. So obviously trying to exercise as much as possible, a few times a week, doing a home workout, or if you have a dog, which I wish I did, but I don't, bringing the dog for a walk, or doing a virtual class. I know UCD Sports and Fitness are doing virtual classes at the moment, and that will be on that little kind of student activities list that we'll send you guys as well. But it is to remember that, you know, trying to get out of our house as much as possible at the moment and going for a walk around your area, different things like that, is really important for managing stress. The next thing then is learning to say no. So this is evaluating your situation before deciding to say yes or no to something. And then if you do have enough on your plate, don't be afraid to say no to certain opportunities. So this may be, for example, you know, maybe you've gotten involved in a society committee or something, and there's something that needs to be done, and you realize that you've X amount of stuff you have to get done for college work, and you realize taking on another thing is just not going to be possible right now. It's okay to say no to these things. Even actually saying, you know, I'm not able to do it right now, but I would be able to do it maybe in a few weeks' time, or I can help you figure out someone else to ask to do it as well, can be useful. But it is to say, when you are offered an opportunity, is to take time and reflect on what you're doing at the moment, and to see, is it actually possible for me to take on another commitment as well. Relaxation then, there's a couple of different things here that can be useful. One of them is deep breathing. We'll kind of talk you through each of them now. Progressive muscular relaxation, mindfulness, and meditation. And it may sound counterintuitive, but sometimes trying to schedule in some things like this can be useful, or at least trying to associate doing some relaxation techniques when you're doing other habits. So for example, if it is before you click into a Zoom call for a lecture, you do a few deep breaths, or if it's that, you know, before going to sleep, you do progressive muscular relaxation, different things like that. It's maybe trying to tie these relaxation techniques with particular activities you're doing during your day. So, for example, deep breathing. The best thing about deep breathing is that it can be done anywhere at a time by anyone. So the 4-7-8 method is useful, and that's where we inhale for 4, we hold for 7, and then very slowly release for 8. That was the hardest part to do, but it is the most important part to do. And the point of doing deep breathing is to help manage those physical reactions of stress that I explained to you earlier, like you know, our rapid breathing, different things like that, is to kind of slow down our heart rate and slow down those physical reactions. So breathing in your nose and out through your mouth, and also to breathe in from the base of your stomach upwards as well. The next thing is a thing called progressive muscular relaxation, and this is particularly useful. You can find some kind of guided ones on YouTube, and some people find it really useful to do this if they're having difficulty falling asleep. And this is where we, you know, close our eyes and we tense for a few seconds, tensing muscle groups for a few seconds and then releasing. So you kind of go through it in a systematic process where you close your eyes, you scrunch your toes, you release them. You tense your calf muscles and then you release them. You suck in your stomach and you release. You hike up your shoulders and release, and then clench your arms and your hands and you release. There, as I said, there's some really useful guided ones on YouTube, which you guys may find useful to have a look at. For mindfulness then, this really is I don't have to do this activity, because the point of mindfulness is to just be in the present in whatever you're doing. That's the thing. So sometimes the point of this is to kind of ground us in our present moment a little bit more. So one helpful technique is a thing to do where it's called the 5-step mindfulness approach, is where you just take a minute to identify 5 things that you can see in your environment, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And yes, apparently we all can taste something that's at every point during our day. It might be difficult to identify that sometimes, but the point of it is to ground us in this particular moment, and to just give us a little bit of clarity and notice things that are around us a little bit more often, because, you know, life is very fast paced at times, and we can find that difficult, or it kind of passes us by. The other thing then is some people do find kind of mindfulness colouring books as well really useful. So if that's something that you'd find, you think would be useful for you, definitely have a look at them. One of the last things then is meditation. So one of them, an app is called Headspace app. I don't know if you guys have heard about it before. So you can get kind of free guided meditations on it. And they range from 3, 5 and 10-minute guided meditations, which are really, really useful. And they walk you through a couple of different meditative practices like body scans and different things of that. So definitely have a look at that. The Oscailt Integrative Health Centre, which is in Ballsbridge, they have a lot of meditations on their website too, and then on YouTube, 2 useful kind of guided meditation challenge are Tara Brock and then the Honest Guys as well. So the thing is that we do have to try and make a plan. Stress is inevitable at times, and particularly, we may not always be able to predict when we're going to get stressed, but there's times where we know that they are going to be more stressful. So for example, exams week may be more stressful, or in advance that weekend is going to have a lot of assignments due. So identify what stresses you out, trial some of the resources to find out what works for you, and then set up your environment in advance if you can. So, setting up having a call with a friend on the first day of exams, or deciding to go for a hike with somewhere close to you that's in your 5K, of course, at the moment, with a family member like that. Try, if at all possible, to plan ahead where we can. And then in conclusion, really, life is all about balance at the end of the day, and it is important that you work when you're supposed to and you rest when you're supposed to, and particularly right now when all of us are working virtually and studying virtually, because like I said, everything gets a bit blurred together. So it is okay to have, I like to call it bookending your day. So starting your day and then finishing your college day and having the rest of the day for yourself. It is okay to do that, and you are allowed to rest. I'm giving you the permission to rest now, as Fiona will know, I do for all my students. So the other thing is I know it's difficult right now, but where at all possible is to allow yourself to have fun and to look after yourself as well. So does anybody have any questions at all before we wrap up? I'm sorry that I've gone over a little bit of time. I don't think so. Oh, hello, Fiona.
Hi, I've popped up there. I'm going to just stop the recording.
Yeah.
I've lost